Yeppoon Sewage Treatment Plant and the introduction of the Waste Resource Recovery Centre at the landfill, which is to be completed in 2022. A number of people in the community have actually approached me and are concerned with illegal dumping of green waste with the introduction of this particular $5 fee. I say that there has and will be those that dump all waste illegally. Our local law officers are doing a fantastic job with infringing those that do. The fine is $266 on the spot. But our vast majority of our residents in our community are honest and honourable. A $5 fee for a trailer load or an on-spot fine for illegal dumping of $266. I know which one I would choose. To offset this fee, though, we'll be offering free standard grade mulch, as Madam CFO has said, to all of the community, and we have abolished the previous fee for mulch. This will cost you nothing to fill up the trailers yourselves. There will continue to be a free loading service on the first Tuesday of the month and the second Saturday of the month, both at Emu Park and Yeppoon. The second fee in this particular sector has been introduced to assist council with the transport costs for solar panels. These panels are transported to a contractor where they are manually stripped of metals and electrical components, and then the glass is removed for recycling. The remaining parts of the panels are then stored in a shipping container and, once full, sent to Victoria to a company that restores and rebuilds solar panels. Our officers care deeply about reducing, recycling and upcycling our waste. We are striving for zero waste and behavioural change. Like the community, council is contributing to a circular economy, one that materials can be reused again. All councils across Queensland have the same, if not similar, issues, and this fee will assist in the recovery process so that, once again, our rates will not have to be impacted and we will even benefit from a fair and equitable user pay system. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. Is anyone speaking against the recommendation? Councillor Eastman.
Look, yeah, the only bone of contention I have is the green waste, Mr. Mayor. Whilst I'm happy to have the charge, I never was happy to have a reduction in the waste vouchers, which could be also used for green waste. In a way, I feel like I'm throwing the baby out with the bathwater in relation to speaking against this, because I believe that everything else is pretty well spot on. But as a matter of conscience and standing up for my community, I have to voice that concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eastwood. Anyone else speaking for the recommendation? Councillor
Mr. Mayor, please.
For?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I think this council, the mistake it's made in the past, we try to serve everybody best we can by overdoing it. And the expectation has grown that it'll be either free or next to nothing. We've been generous to the point of getting ourselves into trouble as far as generosity goes. And I think there's an expectation that people expect that to go on. But we've realised now that we're trying to show transparency in everything we do. It's not a matter of what you do, it's how you do it and how you explain to the people why you're doing it. They understand, they will accept it. As by reducing the vouchers by a couple, I don't have a problem with that, because there's been a whole lot of vouchers that have been out there that have never been used, and it does come at a cost to produce these vouchers, and the ratepayers do have to pay for it even though they don't get used. So we're looking at the costs associated with that as well, where they're not taken up. So I believe this, it's fair. It is fair. It's not easy, but I welcome anybody who wants to run for council. Come and sit on a few of the budget meetings and you'll see just how difficult it can be to please everybody. But our problem has been in the past, as I've viewed it, that we've been overly generous to the point there's been an expectation that will go on forever, and it's not going to happen. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. Anyone else wish to speak to the report? All right, councillors, we'll wrap up debate. We've got a mover in Councillor Bello, a seconder in Councillor Friend. All those in favour? All those against? Carried 5-2. Thank you, councillors. $10.5, Madam CFO, differential general rates.
Thank you, Mayor. Council applies our differential general rates by using both a rate in the dollar and establishing a minimum charge for each of the categories. The categories are determined from a number of factors, including the use of the land and the value of the land that it is associated with for our valuation banding. In setting the differential general rates, Council also considers all of the principles set out in the revenue policy, so that includes equity for like properties, user pays, meaningful contribution, predictability and fairness. So Council also does acknowledge it has a higher rating effort than comparable councils, and this budget proposes that we're taking very specific action to reduce the rating burden on ratepayers. As mentioned already today, this year's budget is proposing a 0% increase on general rate and minimum, the general rate in the dollar and the minimum general rate. In order to rebalance the inequities between large residential and residential properties, the resolution today is also proposing a 1% decrease for those large residential properties. Approximately 62% of ratepayers will either pay the same rates or less in 21-22 as they have in this current financial year. The average residential property will see a decrease of $16.45 or 0.04% for the year. The total budget, the total revenue forecast to be received in this current financial year is $34.9 million, which also includes 1% growth for new rateable properties during the year. I'm happy to take any questions from the councillors on the differential rating categories and the proposed rate in the dollar and minimum general charge.
Councillors, any questions? All right, can I get a mover? Councillor Eastwood, thank you. Second, Councillor Hutton. Councillor Eastwood, would you like to speak to the report?
I'm just going to speak very briefly because we've already spoken a little bit about the rates thus far this morning. This, to me, is the most exciting part of this budget. And I'm very happy to endorse that we've come to that place where we're, on a whole, we have a 0% rate rise. And I just want to thank my team, well, not my team, the team, for all the work that they've put into this, and especially our CFO and her team. So, yep, I endorse this wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rees. Was anyone speaking against the report, the recommendation? Would anyone else like to speak for it? Councillor Mather.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I said earlier, Mr. Mayor and members, this is a budget that any council in Queensland would just love to be able to bring down today or any other day. And despite Councillor Eastwood's optimism, I expect that may change over time, because we still have some... because we still have two major fights on our hands, Mr. Mayor. And you
Only
know what
two.
they are. Two that are going to affect our cents in the dollar, our rating categories, all of those. And that's the acquisition of land in Shoalwater Bay, which will take on, I don't know, I haven't asked exactly the last figure on that, certainly over $1 million in our rate income. And we don't know what the Boundaries Commission is going to be doing with our suburbs. So while we have a rate rise of 0% on most, if not all, and rates and separate charges, we don't know what that's going to be doing next year to us. Hopefully, if we fight the good fight and the people in high places see sense in leaving those boundaries with us for our own viability. As I've said before, I worry about our future if those boundaries go. We will never be able to make up those differences in time to be sustainable. So I like your optimism, I'll join you, but we have to fight, Mr. Mayor. We have to fight for what's rightfully ours. But we have to look down the barrel as to what the reality is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. And as I said previously, we take each year at a time based on the circumstances that confront us. Anyone speaking against again? No, anyone like to speak for? Okay, we'll go to the vote on this one then, councillors. We've got a mover in Councillor Eastwood, a seconder in Councillor Hutton. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. 10.6, separate charges, Madam CFO.
Council has 3 current separate charges. Overall, there is proposed to be a 0% increase in each of these 3 charges. The first charge is the road network separate charge. This one, we use the revenue generated from this, which is about $10.2 million, to defray part of the cost of maintaining the entire road network within the region. So separate charges do apply equally on all rateable land within Livingstone, irrespective of the intensity of the use for each of these various services. Discount does not apply to this charge and hasn't applied historically. The natural environment separate charge is used to defray part of the cost of formulating initiatives for environmental protection, enhancement and conservation, and including various waste management initiatives that contribute to these outcomes. The total revenue generated from the natural environment separate charge is just under $1.2 million, and it remains at $66 per annum on each rateable assessment. The last separate charge is in relation to the disaster response separate charge. This one also, once again, contributes towards implementing measures to mitigate, prepare, respond, recover and build community resilience for our entire Shire, and help support and manage the risk and enhance community resilience for all of our disaster management initiatives. This particular levy remains at $26 per annum, which is a 0% increase on the current financial year. We receive just over $464,000 in revenue from our ratepayers for this particular separate charge.
Thank you, Madam CFO. And as the CFO has pointed out, Council is a 0% increase across all 3 separate charges for this year. Any questions of the CFO? All right. Can I get I'll move this one. So can I get a seconder, please? Councillor Friend, thank you. Councillors, I don't wish to speak to the recommendation. I think I've said enough in relation to this in my preliminary comments. Anyone wish to speak against? Councillor Hutton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Today I will not be supporting the separate charges, recognising that the separate charges of Livingstone provide equality at the expense of equity. In the past, I've always supported these as I value how they offer some line of sight for ratepayers as to how their contribution will be used. However, it's a universal truth that no separate charge, excluding perhaps water, covers the full cost of the activities associated with it. In simple terms, every year, general rates revenue is used to provide additional funds towards roads, towards the environmental projects, etc., which ultimately is as is necessary to get the work done that we need in these sectors. The consequence of this, however, is not only does Livingstone have some of the highest rates, we also have some of the highest separate charges. And we will impose these heightened costs equally across all segments of our community, regardless of their financial capacity. Rates and charges of council are taxed, just like those collected by our federal and state counterparts. Yet, in Livingstone's scenario, we diverge from our federal and state counterparts in that the financial burden, which grows with your financial circumstances or your financial capacity, is ignored for a system which instead raises the base cost of living in our community, ignoring your financial circumstances, your financial capacity. This issue impacts upon our pensioners, it impacts upon our independent seniors, our most struggling families, and the poorest in our community. This is something that future budgets of Livingstone will need to address, and for those parts of the community and for this ever heightened or this high base cost, I'll vote against the separate charges today.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Anyone wishing to speak for the recommendation? Councillor Friend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Looking at these particular separate charges, I acknowledge what Councillor Hutton has said. However, working towards some sort of equality and equity into the future, we need to also look at how these charges enhance the projects, the many, many projects right across council. For example, the natural environmental charge helps offset some projects such as fox detection to enhance the livability of the turtles along our region, also remnant vegetation. And the disaster response separate charge also assists council in helping those community organisations such as SES and helping council work through any natural disasters. And as we are aware, and some of you in the community may not be aware, we've had a natural disaster every year since 2015. So these particular charges, including the road network separate charge, do contribute to the overall costs, the operational costs of keeping our roads of standard, but it doesn't cover it, and it never will, but it does contribute. And to actually abolish these charges or reduce these charges in this particular budget would have meant a rate rise in our rating categories, which we've kept at 0. So it's important moving forward that we will certainly look at these charges and attempt to reduce them in the future, but at this stage at least they've remained static with a 0 rise. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. Anyone speaking against? All right, I'll speak for this one, and I'd like to...
Mr Mayor.
Sorry, would you off the light on?
Speaking against, Mr
You're speaking against? Sorry, Councillor Eastwood. Yep.
Yeah. Look, yes, I really want to endorse Councillor Hutton's comments. Equality at the expense of equity. And I do find it very difficult that the multi-millionaire in their huge mansion is paying the same charges and fees and special charges as the Aussie battler who's really struggling to pull it together. And I just think we can do better in that scenario. And so just on that little detail, which isn't so little if you're one of those people, we'll be voting against this, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eastwood. In support of this motion, councillors, I'll make a couple of comments. I acknowledge Councillor Hutton's concern here in terms of the equality and equity point of view. But Councillor, I find myself aligning with Councillor Friend, because if we're not going to have these charges or we're going to reduce them, then you have two options. You either reduce the level of service, and in the case of the road network levy, I'm sure Councillor Mather's concerns would be greatly enhanced, because that would mean there's less money for rural roads going forward. Or alternatively, you increase rates. So on that basis, I certainly acknowledge there's work to be done, and I look forward to comments from Councillor Hutton and Councillor Eastwood for the next budget as to how that might happen. But for this point of view, it is what we have, and I'll be supporting it. Speaking against, Councillor?
Yeah. Yes, Mr Chair, and this follows on, I guess, from the conversation that we had during the budget. I felt there was an opportunity to address the excessive high levies that Livingstone charge, especially when you see the bar chart in comparison to other councils. Livingstone was excessively high. I did some more research on levies, and my understanding is they call it a regressive type of tax, because it basically just assumes that everybody is on the same page, and therefore they will all pay whatever the levy may be. And we've got a situation where we've got a disaster levy, the fire levy that's been introduced by the state government. And when I saw that levy being introduced, I thought, hang on, no. Any time you're introducing a levy to collect tax, which is what it is, you are assuming that everybody is on an equal footing and should pay the same. And as Councillor Eastwood said, whether it be the top end of town or the bottom end of town, we know that their ability to pay is significantly different. And therefore, I felt we had a better opportunity to wind that back and grind that down in the same way. Interesting that our community voice panels, I believe, or actually no, the budget consultation, those that responded in there supported the levies, from my understanding, okay, as a form of collecting the revenue. But it's not about not allocating money to the environment, or not allocating money to the roads, or not allocating money to disaster, which is what those those levies are collecting for, because it's just all tax. That's what it is. But it's how you collect the revenue. And the fairest way that we have in the country of Australia at the federal level through our taxation system is based on the more you earn, the more you will pay. So to the members out there who contributed to the budget, despite you saying that you support the levies, I support what the levies get spent on. I support the environment getting X amount of money or the roads getting X amount of money. I totally support that, but it's how we collect the revenue to do those activities that I'm not comfortable in supporting. So I look forward to further consideration as in next year's budget. I believe there's a way we can make it better. So on those grounds, I might be supporting this one here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mallow. Anyone else wish to speak to the recommendation?
For, Mr Mayor.
For, Councillor
Yes,
Mather?
yes, I'm going to
You have the
support
floor.
you here. Yeah. Mr Mayor, I would love the debate this time next year, and I would like everybody to sit in on that debate in relation to the separate charges. I've always been an advocate of separate charges. It doesn't show exactly how much the roads cost or the environment costs to bring it to a standard that we require. But what we do, we say we've got a pie of $1 million. We divide that amongst all the ratepayers and everybody pays the same amount. If that were the case, yes, it would be over the top that some couldn't pay. So that's why a lot of it comes back to the general fund, the supplementary money that comes back from the general fund. If you were to use the principle that only we care for those who are disadvantaged, well, those disadvantaged people, many of them have valuations much, much higher than others because they're beachfront or they have the potential to grow. They have the potential use because they're in such a position. Their valuations are very high. What we're forgetting here is that the general rate are tied to your valuations. And every time you're looking at helping the disadvantaged, those people have got a very high valuation and they'll have a very high general rate. And they will be the people who are paying as well. If you put too much onto the general rate, they will be paying more. That's what you need to think about. So I'm always of the opinion that while you've got something that you want to fund, if everybody pays the same, that's fair. If you need more, you take that from the general fund. But at least people know and understand and appreciate, they know where their money's going. And I know at the moment, I'm not getting off the subject, it's not going into their roads because we need more than that, or a different method of administering our service. And that's the other part of the equation that you're not thinking of. But don't lose sight of the fact that if you're going to take it all out of the general fund, those people that you're trying to protect are going to be paying more.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. Anyone else wish to speak to the report, either for or against? All right. Well, as I said previously, councillors, I look forward to the discussion and debate around this for the next year's budget. I have a mover in myself, seconder and Councillor Friend, so we'll go to the vote on this one. All in favour? Those against? Carried 4-3. Thank you, councillors. 10.7, special charges, Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. Council currently has in place 5 special charges. So these include the Rural Fire Services Levy, Northwest Emu Park Sewerage Benefited Area, Causeway Township Sewerage Benefited Area, Mullumbin Sewerage Benefited Area, and the Muskers Beach Revetment Wall. Apart from the Rural Fire Services Levy, the remaining 4 special charges all pertain to capital works or infrastructure that have been provided to those very specific communities. The purpose of special charges are essentially to ensure that the land that those services, infrastructure has been provided for, are making the specific contributions towards the capital cost of providing those particular services. With regards to the Rural Fire Services Levy, this is the only one that is slightly different. Each of the brigades liaise through their local coordinator to develop these fees and are essentially related to the costs that are required for any planned works and replacement of capital items and other costs required to fund the particular services for each of those different brigades. Without these contributions, the services provided by the Royal Fire Brigades would not be able to be provided or maintained without the imposition of the special charge for those particular areas. Happy to take. So in addition, there are no new special charges being proposed for the 21-22. These are all special charges that have been in train for a number of years.
Thank you, Madam CFO. Any questions, councillors? Moved Councillor Hutton, thank you. Can I get a seconder, please? Councillor Mather, thank you. All right, Councillor Hutton, did you wish to speak to it?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. I endorse these special charges as they recognise the need for locals to back locals in regards to funding of our rural fire services. So those who live in the rural fire service area are backing themselves and backing their neighbours in being able to provide this service in the times of greatest need. I also back special charges in that the special partnerships between council and various parts of the community have been developed to actually achieve higher standards of living, and the example being Muskers Beach Revetment Wall, a place where as individuals the residents would be unable to achieve the outcome which has been achieved through the revetment wall, but through a collective in partnership with council they're able to achieve a positive outcome both for the property owners, for the communal public land, and council in its way is playing its part by being the backer of this organisation or this partnership. So I commend it to the table.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Anyone speaking against the recommendation? Anyone else wish to speak for? Councillor Mather?
And just very briefly, Mr. Mayor, being the disaster manager member, I totally endorse Councillor Hutton's comments, Mr. Mayor, because the fire services don't extend to rural areas. Well, they do, they assist, but they don't extend there normally. And while the people don't mind paying, different brigades are asked to collect different amounts depending on their needs. And that's important. They don't ask for any more than is absolutely required. If they need to do it, make a new shed, they say, okay, we need 100,000 for the next so many years, we'll pay $50 to $100 and then we'll slip back. They tailor their needs according to their requirements. The other thing I was going to say, I failed to in the previous discussion, was that while the state government is imposing their will on our councils throughout the state to collect on their behalf, people need to realise that. And although we don't particularly like collecting tax for the state government, I think we need to take a real strong look at that in the future, because while it lets the state off the hook and using us as a convenience to collect their tax, I think it does reflect on our rate notices, and that does affect people as well. But as for the special charges, yes, there are opportunities for people to have water on, to have a revetment wall, to have a service there that would not normally have. And it's important to grow our shire in the best and most economical way we can. And that if it means being the banker for some of these projects, then that's what we have to do. But we do move forward and people do appreciate what we do for them.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. All right. Anyone speaking against? Anyone wish to speak for? All right. We'll wrap up debate. Councillor Hutton, did you want to wrap up at all? All right. All right, we'll go to the vote on this one, councillors. Mover and Councillor Hutton, seconder and Councillor Mather. Sorry, Councillor Watson, your hand, was that? All right. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. 10.8, sewage charges, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. So, councillors, today I'm presenting the utility charges in relation to our sewage network or wastewater scheme for the Capricorn Coast. We only have one declared service area for our sewage or wastewater charges. So the proposal is to increase the amount of charge by $9, so to $838 per charge this year. We have a requirement to consider both our water and wastewater sewage business units as business activities in accordance with legislation. So that essentially means that we need to ensure that we are recovering our costs at the full commercial prices to be in line with the legislative requirements and how to manage these business activities. Council has reviewed its sewage business activities and has identified that the current cost recovery in total is slightly below the commercial cost recovery rates required to operate this under full cost pricing principles. It is forecast that future increases may be slightly higher than CPI, but it will be reviewed on an annual basis. And as part of the resolution, Council is being requested to endorse a 5-year price path, which will be subject to an annual review, which will really be reflective of quantum of capital work and the operation and maintenance costs associated with managing this particular service. In total, the sewerage business generates $11.8 million as an activity, and all of that is reinvested back into the sewerage network. It's not used for any other purpose other than our sewerage network. Happy to take any questions from the councillors in regards to the sewerage utility charges.
Thank you, Madam CFO. And could I prevail upon you just to maybe explain to members of the community about the 5-year price path? Thanks, what that actually means.
So it would be unreasonable to transition to full cost pricing in 1 year. So similarly to what we have done for a number of the pricing reviews, is we've graduated those increases over a 5-year tranche. It does take into consideration the forecast capital works, as well as the additional operation and maintenance costs that some new infrastructure that is being constructed in that period does take into consideration. This ensures that there is no contribution required essentially from the general rates, that is essentially only users of those within the defined Capricorn Coast sewerage area are contributing to that particular cost within that service.
All right. Thank you, Madam CFO. Any questions for the Chief Financial Officer, councillors? All right. Can I get a mover and a second? Mover to Councillor Friend. Seconded, thank you. Councillor Watson. Councillor Friend, did you wish to speak to the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, as Madam CFO has just stated, council need revenue. How do we obtain revenue within our council? We have so many wonderful opportunities for free activities on our coast. Our beautiful lagoon, the Kraken, many, many free activities that cost council millions of dollars. Within our sewage and water business side of council, this is what brings in the revenue, which helps offset rates and other charges. And it's so important because we have an ageing infrastructure system here within Livingstone. It is ageing. There are pipes that need to be replaced. People use the facilities and we don't think anything more of it. But everything comes at a cost, and it's for convenience for those within our community to be able to go to their toilet and use it and not think twice about it. So here in Livingstone, we have a very, very high standard. In fact, our wastewater is A grade. We are very proud, our officers and our workforce are very, very proud of the service delivery that they provide within this sewage and water sector and wastewater sector. And everything does come at a cost. So I endorse this particular agenda. I endorse this security utilities charges, and I leave it with the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. Anyone speaking against? Would anyone else like to speak for? Councillor Watson? Okay. Councillor Hutton.
I will speak to this just to make sure that there's clarity for the community around the sewage utility charges are, for all intents and purposes, a fee for service directly related to the sewage utility business. So while we have an obligation under the Act to consider it a business activity and make sure that we're including a degree of revenue for future activities of this particular business, no money that's raised through the sewage utility charge offsets any costs related to lagoons or any other activity of council. It's purely invested in the activities of this business unit, which is providing sewage services to the coast. And I think one of the important things to recognise is that this is a charge that is only applied to those residents connected to sewage. So the general rates are equivalent across the Shire. This is one where this is a fee for service for a particular service that's provided to those connected to the network, and all money reinvested, all money raised through this charge is reinvested in this particular business activity for both its maintenance, its longevity, and obviously renewal of assets as necessary.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Would anyone else like to speak to the report, either for or against? Okay. We'll wrap up on that one. Councillor Friend, did you want to wrap up, or are you good?
No, I'm good, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to make it known that this is revenue for the sewerage. However, we do have a lot of free activities here on the coast that the revenue, as rightly Councillor Hutton said, does not go back into those particular activities. However, this is one area of our business that does bring in revenue, be it for the sewage or wastewater, and that's so important to help offset any other costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. All right, we'll go to the vote on this one, councillors. We've got a mover, Councillor Friend, second to Councillor Watson. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. 10.9, Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. 10.9 relates to the water utility charges. Council operates 4 different schemes within its water, within its entire water business. Council has been working on reviewing the pricing structure for its water business over the past 2 years. What it identified is that the best approach for council is to consider the cost recovery in aggregate across all schemes, because it would be unreasonable or inequitable for those on the smaller schemes. Essentially, the price that they would need to pay for their water access charges would be considered unreasonable. So there are some of the smaller schemes that the revenue that we generate do not recover all of the costs associated with the provision of water to those individual areas. So this recommendation and the pricing structure has been developed on considering its water business as an aggregate in total. It also, as the Mayor mentioned earlier on in today's meeting, that it is a price path for each of the schemes over 5 years. I have consciously chosen not to, for the purpose of this budget report, to include that 5-year price path within this report. I feel it warrants additional conversations with the councillors and will be subject to a future report over the next coming months. I would also like an opportunity to work with the business just to understand and ensure that we have the correct capital works associated with the water business, as there are quite some large investment in infrastructure. I just want to ensure that we have factored into that pricing path. So it will be coming in the next few months, councillors, but I just wanted an opportunity just to clarify that with you today. However, the underlying principles of having a user pays charging regime is one of the fundamentals of that piece of work. We also have identified that we do have water use by residential properties is relatively high, and there is some work that council can do to enhance the focus of consumption charges by looking at demand management. So this essentially means that you would have a higher price point for those with higher tiers or higher water consumption. So we'll be looking to transition to a 2-tier water path within 5 years. So it's not happening this year, the 2-tier water consumption. We'll still retain the 3-tier water consumption, which are consistent across all of the schemes. So no matter what scheme you are part of, you pay the same for your water consumption. So that's consistent with all of the schemes. So the emphasis here will be education of the community to ensure that there is an incentive to adjust their water use behaviours, and the only real way we can do that is in addition to community education components, but to price the water consumption accordingly. So the price path for the first tier will actually reduce by 2 cents. However, the consumption in the first tier goes down from 75 kilolitres per quarter down to 60 kilolitres per quarter. So it's also important to also reflect that water consumption is billed on a quarterly basis, and the water access is billed on a half-yearly or 6-monthly basis in line with our general rates. Happy to take any questions from the councillors on our water utility charges.
Thank you, Madam CFO. Councillor Hutton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my question relates to the absence of the price path for the improved equality versus equity. Is the direction that there is no reference to seeking to achieve that in this, so it's been removed in its entirety, or is it just that you've removed the price path table? Can you offer some explanation as to how it links back? So, yeah.
So in the supporting community budget report, as well as with the budget consultation paper, we did provide that 5-year price path with, so that is still, is going to be available for the public to review. It's just that I just wanted to ensure that before I asked council to resolve to adopt that specific price path, I wanted to be absolutely certain that it is based on the most accurate and up-to-date information possible. I was more confident that we had that correct information with our sewage utility charges, and I just wanted to spend a bit more time working on the water price path, because it is a $19 million budget line item that has quite significant impacts on our budget and long-term financial forecast. So in saying that, the current price path, which is available with the community budget report, which will be available to everyone, the current budget long-term financial forecast has been predicated on that and the discussions that we've had with the councillors. But I will be seeking a separate resolution of council outside the budget discussions, subject to that further work with the organisation.
Okay. Any other questions of the CFO, councillors? All right. Can I get a mover and a seconder for this one, please? Councillor Friend, thank you. Moving. Seconding. Councillor Watson, thank you. All right, Councillor Friend, did you wish to speak to the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the CFO has actually summed it up quite beautifully, actually. However, I'd just like to point out, on the Capricorn Coast, we have the best tasting water in Queensland, as voted last year in the 2020 awards. We came second in the national awards, only to that of pristine Tasmania. And so for our particular Category 3 council, it's something to be celebrated. It's a wonderful achievement, and that's all I need to say.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. All right, anyone speaking against the report? Councillor Hutton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was, to be honest, quite looking forward to supporting this, in that recognising 2 years ago we had a report that spoke to the cross-subsidisation of our system, which saw that residents on the Capricorn Coast water scheme were subsidising, to no small measure, every other system as part of our water processing. Last year we were unable to deal with it in time for the budget, and said that we were going to make aspirations to try and achieve it this year, and I can appreciate that we want to make sure that we deal with it in a way that gives confidence to officers, confidence to community and confidence to councillors. But last year I said that I could not support the continuation of this gross cross-subsidisation with no line of sight to the community, while we have now provided advice to the community saying that we are going to manage and deal with this into the future. And to hear that the long-term financial plan is predicated on it is undoubtedly a good thing. However, I do have concerns that, yet again, we're perpetuating a system which does not match our revenue policy discussions, or our revenue policy which says that it's about user pays, it's about meaningful contributions, it's about fairness. Last year, those are the reasons I didn't support this policy, and in the absence of that price path being able to be provided as part of this, I'll again continue to be unable to support it this year, but look forward to us getting to that next step and being able to move forward in addressing this challenge that needs to be dealt with for the accountability, but also for the transparency of our community. I think it's something that really, gets under my craw, to be honest.
That's a technical term. Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Anyone speaking for the report? Councillor Mather.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I can appreciate comments from Councillor Hutton, and I understand where our finance officer, Andrea, is coming from, and I endorse having to wait a little longer to get it right, because water is a very, very important commodity. Up my end of the woods, there were thousands of dollars in charges for water consumption, and people blamed the council. But what they didn't realise is that 1 acre lots take up a lot of water if you're going to manage 1 acre with your water. And we've also got very high pressure in that area, so it doesn't take long to use up your, what you'd call an allocation, a reasonable allocation. So I guess they just continue to water the garden as they did, or wash the car, wash down the patio, whatever. They used the water, and it became a burden on them, because they found out at the end of the line that their bill was in the thousands. So education is crucial. We've got so many water schemes in our shire, and I can understand the cross-subsidisation argument. We've got Narimbara coming from Rockhampton, we've got the caves, right up to the caves, all those estates there coming from Rockhampton. We've got Marlborough on a reverse osmosis, we've got Ogmore, which is raw water, we've got the Capricorn Coast. We've got all of those schemes at different prices with different types of administration, different types of mechanism to get there. So we have to take this one slowly and carefully, and we have to be very mindful of how we charge, because some of those people, like in the far north at Ogmore, they have water coming out of a creek, and the dam was made by the people. It's just raw water. The only water they've got is rainwater. So I don't mind taking it slow. It's important that we do. It's important that we understand what we are paying for, what we're asking people to pay for. So I'm supporting this one, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. Anyone speaking against? Anyone else wish to speak for?
A question, probably more a question for me.
Sure.
I must admit I am a little bit torn. Certainly by the debate that's been provided, but from the CFO. So what would we be looking for that we don't yet know? What has been the sort of the catalyst for it being tipped out of the of being presented as it was probably previously been? I recognise it's very complex and all that sort of stuff, taking that into consideration, but something appears to have shifted that we are not confident now to move forward to address something that we've clearly understood needed addressing. If I could ask that, thank you.
The age of some of the water infrastructure is probably no surprise to anyone around the table. And so I just want to ensure that our asset management plans and our planning documents, which are the components required for future growth, have all of the accurate information in order to, that we're replacing the assets at the appropriate cost. So I just want to allow the organisation some sufficient time to get that piece of work done correctly. Because otherwise the risk here is that we would be endorsing a price path that would be materially inaccurate, and then I'll be having to come back and explain that material adjustment to the councillors. So I'd rather I'm presenting you with the most accurate and up-to-date information. So what is being presented today is in line with the first year of that 5-year price path that has been discussed with the councillors previously. That hasn't changed. It's more that year 2 to 5 that I just wanted to ensure that we had that as accurate as possible.
Thank you.
No worries. Any other question? Anyone else wish to speak to the report? I'm sorry. I'll get my head right in a minute. Okay. So we have a mover in Councillor Friend. Did you wish to wrap up, Councillor Friend?
Oh, just very briefly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're in our 7th year since de-amalgamation, and this particular price path that has been established within that those 10 years and within that time, we're now wanting to change that. And we are wanting to make things more equitable, but I do agree with Madam CFO that we do need to, and Councillor Mather, thank you for your comments, we do need to take it slowly so that we have full comprehension of how we're going to manage this into the future. So that's all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. All right, councillors, we'll wrap up debate now and go to the vote. All in favour? 2, 3, those against? Sorry, can I have the in favour again? 1, 2, 3, 4. Beg your pardon, sorry. Yeah. So that's carried 4-3. Thank you, councillors. And I'm going to move a procedural motion that we break for morning tea. All in favour? Thank you, carried. Good to go? Right, yeah. So procedural motion to resume from the break. Move Councillor Mather. Thank you. All in favour? Carried unanimously. All right, we're up to 10.10, councillors, the waste management utility charges. Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. The waste management utility charges incorporate both general waste and recycling charges and are applied based on the number of bins at a property. Commercial charges are also levied on a per bin per collection relative to the type of service which is outlined in the resolution. The proposed per collection service charge for 21-22 for residential properties is set to increase by $8 from $511 per annum to $519 per annum and remains eligible for discount. It is also important to reflect that Council does receive quarterly sums in advance from the Department of Environment and Science to mitigate any direct impacts of the current state government waste levy, which was implemented in 2019-20. However, it is also worthy to note that the Queensland Government have indicated that the advance payments will expire in 22-23. Council does anticipate that this will have a significant cost to our users of their waste utility charges, and those pricing considerations need to be assessed over the next 12 months. As part of this package, and we've already reflected upon the changing in the green waste charging regime, which is one of the components of the waste business activity. And whilst not specifically in the resolution, one of the underlying components is also about the reduction of waste disposal vouchers from 12 down to 10 vouchers this year. Council is also currently unable to identify which are the users, so those connected to our garbage service or those who don't receive a garbage service are the users of those waste disposal vouchers. So this year, ratepayers will receive a different coloured, a colour-coded waste charge. So those who are not connected to a cleansing charge will receive a different coloured waste voucher than those who do pay for a utility charge, just to allow us to capture some data and information about who is actually redeeming the waste disposal vouchers to factor into the future application of those particular charges. I'm happy to take any questions from the councillors in regards to our waste management utility charges.
Councillors, any questions? Okay. All right. Can I, Councillor Friend is moving. Can I get a seconder, please? Councillor Watson, he just beat you, Councillor Bello. All right. So, thank you, councillors. Councillor Friend, did you wish to speak to the report?
Yes, I will speak to the report, and I'll take it as read by those at the table and those that have read the agenda. There are 39 out of 77 councils across Queensland that the Queensland State Government has enforced a waste levy on the householders for the disposal of eligible municipal solid waste generated. Livingstone Shire Council is included, and Livingstone Shire Council pay this levy to the state. Up until now, the Department of Environment and Science, as Madam CFO has stated, has mitigated these payments, granting council quarterly payments to offset the impact. However, as this report reads, the long-term financial forecast does not factor any advance payments to council to cover the cost of the state government's waste levy beyond June 2022. And these costs are staggering, and our council is committed to providing this collection service at an affordable charge to each household in the serviceable area. In 2019 to 20, there were 850,000 curbside collections within our shire, retrieving 8,083 tonnes of general waste and 1,704 tonnes of recycling. It is a service that we all take for granted, yet it is a service that is one of the most important. As a community, I urge everyone to let us try to avoid waste by making sustainable consumer choices, separating resources from the waste produced in homes, public places and workplaces, taking action to increase resource recovery and improve understanding about the waste issues that Livingstone are currently finding. This adoption of the Waste Management Utility Charges ensures Council's compliance with the requirements of the Local Government Act 2009, and I commend it to the table.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. Is anyone speaking against the report? Would anyone else like to speak for? Councillor Watson?
During our talks about the budget and everything else, there was a lot of talk about the the vouchers and reducing them. I, for one, remember when my parents voted that in back in 1997, when they were councillors here, and it's been something that's been ongoing, and I've always thought it was good and used, but since becoming a councillor, I find out that many people don't use them. I thought it was very important that we changed the vouchers to different colours to find out where they were being used, which is going to help us in the future. And it's just one thing that's good about those vouchers bringing in, even though we're going back to 10, but if we're not using them all, well, it really doesn't make that much difference. So I'm just happy that we're doing something to find out who is using these vouchers and where are they being used. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Anyone speaking against? All right. Anyone else wish to speak for? All right. Looks like we're wrapping up debate. Councillor Friend, did you wish to wrap up?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right, thank you. So we'll go to the vote on this one, councillors. We've got a mover in Councillor Friend, seconder in Councillor Watson. All in favour? Those against? Thank you, councillors. That's carried 6-1. (1011), Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. Report 1011 relates to the discount, which is Council's incentive for prompt payment of our rates and utility charges for our ratepayers. This recommendation is consistent with the level of discount that's been applied in previous years and resolved by Council in previous years. So that is 10% on the gross differential general rates, sewerage, water and waste management utility charges, but does exclude water consumption, the emergency services levy, all special and separate rates and charges. This does require a full payment of the amount outstanding, including any overdue amounts, including interest to the date of payment.
Thank you, Madam CFO. Any questions, councillors? I think this one's fairly straightforward. All right, can I get I'm happy to move this one. Seconded, Councillor Eastwood. Thank you. So, councillors, this particular, as you know, this particular report deals with the discount given to our ratepayers on their the general rates and their levies, and I think it's a good way to incentivise early payment of rates, and has done so historically over the years. There was, as you know, some discussion during our workshops around the budget about this level of discount. And I guess I'm happy to say that it has been maintained. Whether that continues in the future will be a matter for future councils to determine. But I thank you for your support on this one, and I commend it to the table. Anyone speaking against? Anyone else wish to speak for? Councillor Mather? Oh, fastest fingers in the West over there. Councillor Eastwood.
As a seconder, Mr Mayor, yes, look, I believe it's really, really important that we do give that incentive to get people to pay their rates on time, but also it helps to bring the rates down to a lot more manageable price, and yeah, it is a great thing, and we all like a discount, and I think it's good for the community and it's good for us.
Thank you, Councillor Eastwood. I'm taking it no one else is speaking against, so Councillor Mather, did you wish to speak for?
Just to say, Mr Mayor, that with a zero rate increase, and certainly with separate charges also a zero increase, it's commendable that the council can come out with the 10% as we did last year.
Thank you, Councillor Mather. All right, councillors, any other comments? I'll just open the floor. All right, we'll go to the vote on this one. I don't feel the need to wrap up. So I've got a mover in myself, a seconder in Councillor Eastwood. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. So we're up to 1012, Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. 1012 relates to the interest that is levied on overdue rates and charges, including water consumption. Council should be commended for the foresight it had a number of years ago, where it actually reduced the percentage that was levied down from the statutory amount, which was 11%, down to 7%. So council's had that in place for a number of years. There were some legislative changes 2 years ago which set the maximum statutory rate of interest of 8% plus the bank bill yield rate. So that has been determined to be 8.03%. So council has been well under the statutory maximum interest rate for the past 3 years. So council is one of the very few that had a lower amount of interest being charged on overdue rates within our sector. That being said, this isn't a change from the previous year, so the resolution does reflect the current practice.
Thank you, Madam CFO. And can I just make a statement to the members of our community in relation to overdue rates and interest? There are a number of mechanisms available within council for you to pay your rates, and also if you are having difficulty in paying your rates. So I'd urge you to contact the revenue team at your earliest convenience if you fit into this category, if you are indeed foreseeing that you will have difficulty paying your rates, so that we can make available to you one of the various schemes for you to pay your rates without running into trouble with council. So the 7% interest, as the Chief Financial Officer has said, is below many of the recommended levels and below many of our colleague councils right throughout Queensland. So councillors, can I get a mover and a seconder for this one, please? Councillor Bello, would you like to move this one? Thank you. Seconded. Councillor Mather, thank you. All right. Councillor Bello, did you wish to speak to it?
No, Mr Chair, thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone speaking against? All right, Councillor Mather, did you wish to speak for?
Just very briefly, Mr Mayor. Seeing we've been notorious, I guess, for having some of the highest rates in the state, we have now claimed the honour of having the lowest interest rates for those outstanding rates.
Thank you, Councillor Mather.
And I'd have to endorse your comments too, Mr Mayor, that ratepayers need to be aware that there are various mechanisms at this office that are available to them to be able to pay those on an ongoing basis, whether by deductions or default. So there are, and it's all confidential, Mr Mayor.
Indeed.
Because we do have some of those, and they've been, I think, appreciative that their properties haven't been put under the microscope for sale, because I think some people have come close to that, but we have an obligation to actually ensure that people do pay their rates, and we do have a moral obligation, I believe, to make sure that they're not having difficulty and struggling at home without help. So while we can afford to do that, both of those, with staff, good staff, we can keep our ratepayers paying rates and in their homes.
Indeed, thank you, Councillor Mather, and I think there's a recognition around the table that by bringing in a 0 rate percentage increase in the residential categories, that's part of council's way of assisting the struggling people in our community. All right, councillors, we've got a mover and Councillor Bello, a seconder and Councillor Mather for this one. Can I get a show of hands all in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. (10.13), Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. 10.13 is resolutions regarding the levy and payment timing of the payment periods for the 21-22 rates and charges that will have been adopted as part of this particular budget. So consistent with previous years, a recommendation is to provide for our rates and utility charges to be levied half yearly, with the exception of water consumption, which will continue to be levied at quarterly intervals on a rolling basis. It also provides that the rates and utility charges will be provided 35 days for prompt payment. I'd also like to reflect that this was a very specific question asked through the budget consultation process. 72% of the respondents provided that they would prefer to retain the current rate billing cycle rather than moving to a quarterly rating frequency.
No, that was a noteworthy outcome indeed. Councillors, I'm happy to move this one. Can I get a seconder, please? Councillor Watson, thank you. I think it's fairly self-explanatory, councillors. We've dealt with this quite extensively throughout our workshop program. It just relates... Sorry? Yes, you can do questions, councillor. That's right. Fire away, Councillor Watson. No, you, fire away.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just have a question for Andrea. Out of the 72% of the respondents for the budget, how many people does that actually equate to who actually said that?
So, if I recall, we had about 150 survey respondents, so about 100 odd people. So it isn't statistically representative of the entire community, but that very small snapshot, the sample of the community indicated a strong preference. If there is appetite from around the table, we could continue to engage with the community over the next coming years on that. We have asked, this is the second time we've asked that question in the past 4 years, and there was a slight shift away from, so previously the respondents indicated a slightly more of a preference to go to quarterly billing. This time a very similar sample size, a very strong preference to retain the current status quo. So I think it is something worthy just to keep on the agenda with the community, but potentially not to pursue as part of the 21-22 budget.
Thank you very much for answering that, Andrea. I'd just like to make one little statement that moving forward, it would be great to go back to the community with that question only rather than a heap of different questions. I've had quite a few people approach me about quarterly billing because they feel that it would be more affordable to actually assist in their paying of the rates. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. All right, I guess any other comments? Sorry, anyone wants to speak against the report? Anyone wishing to speak for it? Councillor Mather.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I believe in half-yearly charges, contrary to my colleague over here, but it's a matter of opinion and what's convenient for them. Where we are in the western suburbs, it's not easy to get around everybody or so many properties in a day, and our quarterly billing would be, I think, difficult for them because they'd be receiving one bill probably 2 months behind when the consumption ended, and that'd be on top, the next one would be on top of them. So it's not easy for everybody. And I think we did try staggered charges before. We got into trouble with the state government. The Ombudsman came and took us along, and I was part of that too, so I have good memory on these confusions. When we start changing water readings and water billing, and I don't want to go back to those days because we were taken to task big time. We were overcharged people. That's what really happened in the end. Big time.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Mather. All right, councillors, I'll just who this is who voted on this one? Sorry, Councillor Bello moved. Right. Second, Councillor
Can't
Mather.
actually recall, but I'm happy to support this one. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Thank you. Did we go to move in a second on this one? We did. I thought I moved it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did.
I'll leave it back to you.
Righto. Yeah. This is 10:13. Yep, righto. We're in the right place now. All right, so just in summing up, councillors, and I guess I'd make a couple of comments to the community. If you wish any of these types of arrangements to change, then you have to let us know. And I think a 150-person response to our survey is beyond poor. Quite frankly, I think as a community we can do better than that. If you want to let us know, then you've got to let us know in numbers that actually make a difference. And I think for us to make a decision based on a 150-person response is inadequate. And so I guess the first question I'm asking people these days when they make comments about the budget leading up to today was, have you filled out the survey? Have you actually been online and done gone through the budgeting tool? And to a man, the answer's been no. So that's my frustration with all of this, councillors. And Councillor Friend, I take on board your comments with your contacts, but certainly with the ones I've spoken to, there's been no engagement with council on a formal basis. All right, so we've got a mover and a seconder, councillors. Go to the vote on this one. All in favour? Those against? Thank you. It's carried, councillors. I've just timed out, councillors. Excuse me for a second. So up to 10:14, Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, report 1014 is regards to the rating rebates and concessions policy. This particular policy, the purpose is to identify target groups and establish guidelines to assess all of the requests for rate and utility charge revisions in order to alleviate the impact of our rating and charging, particularly in those in relation to not-for-profit or community groups or ratepayers who are in receipt of an approved government pension, or land holders with the approved nature refuge agreements. So quite simply, there are three types of remissions that we do provide. The first one, which is also the largest, is those who are recipients of approved government pension cards. So the total, so council has maintained a maximum of $300 rebate for those eligible pensioners. The total cost of providing this pensioner remission is estimated to be just under $760,000 for 21-22. In the body of the report, councillors would have noted we have done some comparisons based on the 2021 budgets adopted by councillors, and we are the fourth highest out of the 17 sampled councils. The second category of recipients are those not-for-profit or charitable organisations. This is essentially those organisations such as surf lifesaving clubs, showgrounds, kindergartens, rural fire brigades, community art associations, and any other charitable organisations assisting the aged or disadvantaged, and sporting clubs. The estimated total value of the remissions offered for those organisations is estimated to be $126,000. The last group is the nature refuge agreements. So these are those landowners that provide a portion of their land for the directed specifically for the conservation of our natural resources within their private land holdings. And the estimated value of this support is $5,700 per annum. There have been no changes to the current practice in this particular policy, so it is therefore consistent with how council, the resolutions of previous years of council.
You're moving or asking a question? Happy to move right here. Any questions of the CFO councillors in regard to this report?
Just one, Mr Mayor, please.
Councillor Mather?
So just adding up those, Andrea, $891,000 in concessions. Would that be correct? If you're looking at 126, 760 and 5,500, I think it is. $891,000.
That's correct. We also, in terms of our budget and long-term financial forecast, also provide an estimate for increase growth in the number of people who would be eligible for those. So the actual budget line item is a little bit higher than those values.
And it would be interesting too, Mr Mayor, for the next budget to look at the number of schools and, I mean, we've probably got that information now, the number of schools and churches and so forth that do have valuations, but obviously don't pay rates.
We would have that information, councillor.
Yes, I think it's important that the public does know that as well.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions of the officer, councillors? Rightio. All right, so we have a mover in Councillor Hutton, a seconder in Councillor Eastwood. Councillor Hutton, did you wish to speak to the report?
Yes, please, Mr Mayor. This is a significant policy and outlines one way that our social obligation is reflected through the budget. For our pensioners, this provides them the opportunity to age in place in community, recognising that their health and well-being is better if they can remain in their community, surrounded by their friends, remaining in activities and part of the community that they have grown in. Our remission of up to a maximum of some $300 has continued to be one of the highest in the state, recognising that the state remission of some $200 has not changed in close to 20 years. We also see in this policy $126,600 which will not be paid by not-for-profit or charitable organisations in our community. This reflects both their limited financial capacity but also the importance that our community places on the work that they do, knowing that neither council nor state government nor any other organisation could replicate the good that they do in our community, and this is one way we can give them a hand up, not a hand out. Further, I'm incredibly proud that Livingstone made the choice a couple of years ago to introduce the nature refuge agreements. This means that people who are private landowners who make a choice to actually have some of their land used as green corridors or wildlife pathways, and they actually have a strict code that they have to meet. You just can't choose to do it. Anyone can't choose to do this. They have to meet these obligations to demonstrate that they've achieved the nature refuge status. We're giving them a discount because they've got less usable land and they're committing that land for the greater good of our community, which I think is highly admirable and something that everyone at this table would support.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Is anyone speaking against the report? Would anyone else like to speak for Councillor Eastwood.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. This is a really, really important policy, and we can never underestimate the value that our community organisations and our wildlife carers and of course our pensioners add to our community and our society. And it's really, really important, as Councillor Hutton has already showed us, the importance of keeping our pensioners in their homes so that they can be part of and valued by our community. There is a cost, but the cost is insignificant compared to the cost that would be if we neglect all of these, the pensioners and the organisations that add so much to our community and make our Shire what it is today.
Well said, Councillor Eastwood, thank you. All right, Councillor, did you wish to wrap up or are you good? All right, we'll go to the vote on this one, Councillor. I think it's fairly clear cut. So all in favour? Carried unanimously, thank you. So 10:15, Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. Whilst all of the preceding reports have been focused on next year's financial year, the legislation also requires Council to adopt a statement of estimated financial position for the current financial year. It is really important that we do consider this. We won't be asking councillors to adopt a separate revised budget. This information also then informs the budget and long-term financial forecast that will be presented in a few reports later. So overall, since Council adopted the Q2 revised budget, the operating surplus is forecast to be an improved outcome based on the Q2 revised budget, and this is largely contributed from two main factors. So the first one is the level of development fees that have been received since the Q2 budget has been adopted. So that's been the most significant increase in our fees and charges. Which has also been offset by deferral of a private works, significant private works job. So we had to reduce the sales revenue associated with that, but it also had a corresponding effect of having to reduce some of our operational costs on that side as well, which is the decrease that you can see there for that particular one. Our closing cash is estimated to be $63.5 million. It's quite significantly higher than the forecasted position, and that's largely related to the quantum of the deferral of capital works that were unable to be completed this particular year, but also associated with the large contributions from the state and federal governments in the capital grants and subsidies that are attached to those. So there are quite often milestone payments. We receive the cash well in advance of completing the particular work, which we do ensure that those funds are set aside and released as revenue when the proportion of work is completed. And our total borrowings, it's a very small change there just to reflect some interest adjustments, but there is no material movement with our total borrowings. It's still on track to be an overall reduction. I'm happy to take any questions from councillors in regards to the estimated financial position. Oh, sorry, the one other thing that I would also like to add is these are estimated until such point as we go through the audited financial statement process, which will then we'll bring back to the council, and you'll have a review of a number of opportunities, for example, with the audited statements, the annual financial report, as well as the Q1 budget review process.
Thank you, Madam CFO. And just to clarify, for members of the community who are looking at the closing cash and cash equivalents figure of approximately $63.5 million, thinking, why can't we use that to reduce our rates? Madam CFO, that money is pretty much earmarked, as I understand it. So it's earmarked for projects, so we can't apply it to rate reduction anyway. Or any other questions of the officer? Thank you, councillors.
The question I had, Mr. Chair, to the CFO is, would it be fair to say that this is a pretty good news story from your position?
I think it certainly does reflect the unexpected outcomes of the level of development activity, and you can see that both in the fees and charges that we received, as well as the astronomical amount that has been received in infrastructure charges for this year. But we also need to be mindful with the developer contribution, so the infrastructure charges, that they can only ever be used towards funding trunk infrastructure. So we do ensure that those funds are set aside and are only ever used for that particular purpose. So we don't use those funds to fund operating activities, and therefore, as the Mayor mentioned before, we can't use to allocate towards general rate reduction.
All right, councillors, can I get a mover and a seconder for this, please? Moved Councillor Bello, thank you. Seconded Councillor Hutton. Councillor Bello, do you wish to speak to the report?
Yeah, I do, Mr. Chair, and I guess following on from a line of questioning there, I'm very encouraged to see this report here presented of our estimated financial position. You know, there's many things outside of our influence, and there are some things that are within our influence. What we've seen happen within the development community here is in many ways outside of our influence, but it's so encouraging to see it when it's in writing, see the data, see the growth, because we do clearly have some challenges moving forward, and Councillor May alluded to them earlier on. Boundary reviews, it's outside of our influence. Purchasing of properties at Standish Bay, outside of our influence. But we're seeing growth in this Shire that like we've never seen before, and that's a fantastic, encouraging sign to see, and I think it's one that we should really celebrate and remind our community that we're here to be custodians of your budget, to try and, as the CFO has mentioned, that money that developers contribute is for trunk infrastructure. Every element of the budget that we're responsible for, we're custodians of that to spend it in the best possible way we can, and to see that reflected in here, I think is a very much a positive sign for us moving forward, and I'm encouraged to see that presented there. So thank you, Madam CFO.
Indeed, Councillor Bello, thank you very much. Anyone speaking against the report? Would anyone else like to speak for it? All right, we'll go to the vote then, councillors. We'll wrap up debate. We've got a mover in Councillor Bello, a seconder in Councillor Hutton. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Beg your pardon? Oh, sorry. Did you were voting against? Oh, you pardon. 7-6-1. 10-16, Madam CFO.
Report 1016 is our 2021-22 debt policy. So in accordance with the budget and long-term financial plan, no debt is forecast to be borrowed during the 21-22 financial year. This is based on the current capital works program, and should there be any significant changes, councillors may wish to consider debt borrowing as an alternate source of funding for those various capital projects. In terms of the budget implications, the total amount of interest expense payable is about $3.1 million, and that's in Table 2 of the debt policy. Council will also pay down debt to just under $5.3 million to have the total estimated balance of our debt go down from, $65.2 million down to just under $60 million within the next financial year.
Any questions, councillors? I think a good news story in that we are on a downward trajectory for our debt level. All right. Councillor Bello, do you wish to move this one? Your portfolio?
Anybody else? Happy to, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. I'm happy to second. Councillor Bello, do you wish to speak to the report?
Well, only just to, I guess, to remind the public of the commitment that this council is making to reducing that debt. Obviously, we apportion a significant amount of our revenue that we bring in towards this debt reduction, and that's what we believe is the responsible position to take. So I think it's the right step to take in.
Anyone wishing to speak against?
It's the opportunity to speak at all, Mr. Mayor, because I don't have a problem supporting no debt. But what I need to remind the table of is that we have two pieces of infrastructure in the western areas, each being the Mount Charlton Reservoir and the pipeline, each 100 years old. And at some stage we may be required to take on additional debt if they fail us. And if the report that we received to say that they might have 20, 30 years left in them isn't accurate, then we would need to take on something. And the only way I can see this without having it budgeted in our annual reports is a debt. So we must be also mindful that that's sitting in the wings as a risk until such time as they're addressed.
I'm aware during the discussions around this budget, councillor, and in the workshops that we've raised that particular topic, and I think all the councillors around the table are aware of it, and the officers certainly are aware of it. Going forward though, I mean, for this adopting this particular budget, we can only adopt what we have in front of us with the information that we have, and we haven't received the report yet from the officers on the Mount Charlton Reservoir. So at this stage we are unaware of what that is likely to cost and how we're going to fund it, but certainly is in the back of everyone's mind at this point and will no doubt be considered in future budgets. All right, we've got a mover in Councillor Bello, seconder in myself. All in favour? I'm sorry, mate, did you want to speak? No, I'll be back. Right. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. 10:17, Madam CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. 1017 is identifying the 21-22 significant and other business activities that council apply the Code of Competitive Conduct to under and also apply the national competition policies. I would just like to make an amendment to point 7 where it has caravan park operations. That's actually incorrect, and I'll talk a bit more about that one. This one is largely consistent with previous years in that we have a number of activities that are considered to be business activities. So those include water and sewage operations, waste operations, building certification, which is actually prescribed for our organisation. And then we have a number of smaller operations that we identify as commercial activities because we are competing against other established businesses within our area, and those include caravan parks, car parking, car wash operations and cemetery operations. So there's a whole suite of recommendations that relate to that one. The reason why I asked for caravan parks to be removed from point 7 is the proposal this year is actually to not apply the Code of Competitive Conduct to the caravan park operations this year, as the business activities for that particular function are less than the prescribed amount of $340,000. That's because council has leased out the 2 of our 3 caravan park operations and have done so for a number of years. So the cost to maintain essentially the one park that we have left, which is Keppel Sands, is well below the materiality or the business activity threshold that's prescribed by the legislation. So I'm happy to take any other questions from the councillors as it relates to the significant and other business activities of the organisation.
All right, thank you, Madam CFO. So we're looking at an amendment to this particular report. You've done that? Right, yeah. Excellent. So that's gone out of 7, right. All right, any questions, councillors? All right, can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Mover? Councillor Mather, thank you. Seconder? Councillor Watson, thank you. Councillor Mather, did you wish to speak to the report?
They've been well said, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Anyone wish to speak against? Would anyone else like to speak for? Councillor Watson? No? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, just one little thing. The Keppel Sands Caravan Park, I think it has room to move as far as growth goes. So I'd like to see us concentrate on that for the next budget.
We can certainly have a
Because
look at
I
that,
think
councillor.
we could do a lot to increase the income at that park.
We can have a look at that, councillor.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so we'll wrap up debate on this one, councillors. We've got a mover in Councillor Mather, second to Councillor Watson. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. 10:18, Madam CFO. Lucky last.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm going to do things a little bit differently, and I actually have some slides which summarise the budget and long-term financial forecast, which might be a little bit easier to digest than all of the statements and the attachments to this particular one.
Madam CFO, sorry to interrupt you, this might be useful for the press to sort of take note of as well, because this will be a summary document.
So councillors would have be well aware of it, essentially, that the focus throughout the entire budget process. So it really has been an emphasis on ensuring that the community are involved in the process. So we undertook two rounds of community consultation, both with the pre-budget process prior to Christmas and then with the budget proposal a couple of months ago. And it's also important to recognise involvement of our community voice panel members in going through that particular process as well. There was a lot of work done within the organisation on really articulating and capturing what our various service standards are and the level of service that we provide throughout the organisation. And we wanted to work with the organisation to ensure that we're measuring our service efficiency and effectiveness, and those measures were meaningful. There's also an opportunity, and over the next 12 months as well, to challenge the level of service and the various operating models. So we do have a program in place that we'll be discussing each of those service areas in more detail with the councillors well in advance of budget workshop discussions. It was also really important to ensure that we continue the alignment with our community plan, and certainly the financial sustainability strategies that were discussed very early on in the piece with the councillors reflected the intent of that 30-year plan. The financial sustainability strategies are really around three components, and that is ensuring that we have a responsible approach to rating, that we are committed to delivering our full capital program, and a real emphasis on debt reduction. So with the full capital program, that there is, with this budget and the subsequent budget, that there is a focus on renewal of existing assets over construction of new assets. It also needs to recognise that we do have a need for new assets, but that is aligned with our forecast growth and with development activity within our region. It's also really important to reflect that we do have a heavy contributions by both the Queensland Government and the Federal Government to the tune of $28.7 million towards our capital program for the next financial year. So in the current year, Council also took the opportunity to pay out one of our existing debt pools, and we'll continue to pay down our debt by $5.3 million, and there are no new borrowings within the forecast period. So that's within the next 10 years. We don't have any new borrowings forecast. With our responsible approach to rating, we've gone through that there was a 0% increase on general rates and separate charges, and we're looking at the equity approach with our large residential properties. We have implemented charging regimes in regards to the user pay, a 5-year price path for our water services, and we're transitioning to a 2-tier water consumption process. So in summary, the 21-22 budget is a total budget of $145.6 million. That includes an investment of $50.3 million on our community infrastructure. We're maintaining an operating surplus of $300,000, but that also includes a 0% increase on general and separate rate charges. Our debt is reducing down to $60 million, and we'll forecast to have $47 million in cash at the end of next financial year. The impact on our ratepayers, so as we've mentioned earlier today, the average residential property will see a combined decrease of all our rates and charges of 0.4%, which is about $16.45 per year. But just under 62% of all our ratepayers will either have a 0% increase or up to a $100 decrease on their rates compared to what they're paying this year. In terms of our operating revenue, we can see from the graph that's on the screen here that there is 83% of our revenue does come from our rates and utility charges, so that is our largest revenue stream. We also receive equal amounts forecast for next financial year through our fees and charges and operational grants and subsidies, which includes the financial assistance grant provided through the state government. Our operating expenditure is forecast to be $95.2 million, and the largest component of that is within our employee costs, and closely followed by our materials and services. Depreciation amortisation also constitutes just under 1/4 of our operating costs. Our long-term borrowings continue to decline. The columns in grey are the historical actuals and the forecast for 2021. The red line that I do have on here is what the councillor's appetite was for our maximum borrowing target based on a per capita comparable basis with other councils within the coastal segment. So that's sitting at around $50 million. What that does highlight is towards the medium to long term that there is capacity for council to take on new borrowings for the right type of infrastructure within that period. but we will achieve that target within the 3 years, which was the goal that the councillors had set out through those earlier on discussions. Our cash balances continue to stay above our target of $20 million. So $20 million reflects 3 months worth of cash that we require to continue to operate, and council does remain well above that over the forecast period. We do note that within the medium term that it does decline. It's also important to reflect that we don't preempt any within our budget long-term financial forecast. We don't rely on capital grants and subsidies to fund our capital program, which will also account for some of the decline in the medium to long term. Where those programs have extended out, I think Roads to Recovery and TIDS are two examples of those, where they do have longer term commitments. They are reflected within our capital funding. So within our CapEx program for this year, you can see that well over half of that is invested within our roads, drainage and bridge network. We do have significant investment in both our sewage, water and some commitments with our land and site improvements. So over the next 10 years, we are forecast to invest just over $320 million in community infrastructure over the next 10 years. And the graph illustrates the split between renewal of existing assets and new and upgrading of infrastructure. That also includes new infrastructure where required as part of our local government infrastructure plan. In terms of the things that we're doing that align with our community plan theme, so under Livable Livingstone, we have a number of amenities renewal that are occurring at some of our parks within the region. We've also allocated some funds for the planning and design for the Yeppoon Aquatic Centre that is externally funded. There is $20,000 being allocated towards the resurfacing of the Glenlee Park tennis courts and some upgrades and repairs to the Emu Park skate park shade. And there are a number of strategic reviews for some of these assets, such as the principal cycle network, open space and sporting needs, and we will incorporate those findings and bring those to the council table over the next 12 months. For Thriving Livingstone, so we are progressing the Reconciliation Action Plan, delivering the Indigenous Languages and Arts Project, completion of some new shade structures at the Lagoon Precinct. We are providing $195,000 in event sponsorship. We make a contribution of $30,000 towards the Regional Arts Development Fund, and we've also set aside $70,000 towards arts and culture events. Natural Livingstone. So the Waste 2030 is our 10-year strategic waste plan, so that should be coming forward to council within the next few months. There are a number of plans to support the coastal and marine environment, and that's things like progressing the actions from the CHAS, shoreline erosion management plans, and there are a number of plans and strategies that are articulated in the operational plan that was adopted earlier today. In terms of infrastructure investments, it'll be the construction of the West Emu Park Reservoir, completion of the resource recovery area at the Yeppoon landfill, completion of the Yeppoon Water Recycling Augmentation Project, and the installation of the solar power at the Yeppoon Sewage Treatment. That should say plant, not plan. Leading Livingstone, this is more about working on the business. So we will be doing a review through the CEO on our customer service charter. There is some great work being led by our Chief Human Resource Officer on developing our workforce leaders. We're also investing on the business in improving our business systems through Project Merlin, and as I'd mentioned earlier, undertaking a detailed review, a continuous improvement review of levels of services with the councillors. Future Livingstone, so we're progressing the largest project on there is of course the Stanwich Bay Road upgrade, which is a fully funded project. Also worthy to note that an additional $80,000 has been allocated towards the school bus route maintenance. There'll be some work progressing on sustainable design principles for building, and we're also doing quite a bit of work on ensuring that our strategic infrastructure planning, all of those underlying assumptions and those strategic documents are updated to ensure that we have the right infrastructure available at the right time for future development, population and employment growth. We've also identified $400,000 for CBD CCTV surveillance system within the Yeppoon precinct. So councillors, that's a very high-level summary of the documents that are being presented as part of the budget and long-term financial forecast. I'll also draw your attention to attachment 2, which is the measures of financial sustainability. And it's worthy to note that for the 21-22 year, council will achieve all of the is forecast to achieve all of the legislated targets, including the asset sustainability ratio, net financial liabilities ratio, and the operating surplus ratio. Attachment 3, I thought I'll just take this opportunity to explain that one as well. So this is also a requirement that we just have to identify the total value of the change in rates and charges levied from the previous year. So overall, compared to the Q2 budget, the total gross income that will come is 1.8%, which is $1.5 million. But that also does include a growth factor for new properties and new contributors to all of those various revenue streams. So councillors, I'm happy to take on board any questions that you may have in regards to this final report for today's budget meeting.
Thank you, Madam CFO, and thank you for a report that simplifies what normally are somewhat complex financial statements. So I think that's understandable and very readable, so thank you so much. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Mather?
Yes, to Andrea, thanks, Mr Mayor. Attachment 2, Andrea, you mentioned the asset sustainability ratio. You said we've met all the guidelines. We're only halfway to that one. On page 273.
I will need to get back to that's maybe that's a good pickup, Councillor Mather. I believe it should be sitting at more like 120% for 21-22.
I thought
That was
that's
the
what
quoted
we
figure,
spoke
yeah.
of before. And I thought, did I mishear that one?
No, you didn't, Councillor. It was 120%, so the graph is incorrect.
Yes. Well, if it's incorrect, I'm very happy that it's incorrect.
So on page 264 of the agenda, there is a table that has the result being 120%.
Very consistent then. 264.
In the table on the bottom of the page. All right, councillors, can I get a mover and a seconder for this one, please? Moved, Councillor. Go with Councillor Eastwood, seconded Councillor Friend. Sorry? No. I'm not going to split hairs. Okay, I'll move it. Seconded. Sorry, Councillor Friend, you got bumped. Councillor Eastwood, thank you. All right. Councillors, I think following a very comprehensive report from the Chief Financial Officer, I don't feel the need to speak to the report. So anyone speaking against? Would anyone like to speak for? Councillor Friend? Councillor Eastwood?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Today's been very exciting for Livingstone Shire Council. 0 rate rises on our domestic rating categories. None of our levies have increased. We retain our pensioner discounts and rebates. It's a wonderful outcome considering this time last year we were increasing through consumer price index. For the portfolio holder of waste, water, sewage, natural environment, I'm really very excited about moving forward into this next financial year. $23.7 million towards operating maintenance and supporting water and wastewater sewage services to 14,000 properties. We are developing a 10-year strategic waste plan, 2030. We're investing ways to divert our biosolids, waste from the landfill, and we're progressing and supporting plans to protect coastal and marine environments with developing the Fig Tree Creek Master Plan, Reef Guardian Action Plan, Shoreline Erosion Management Plans, Coastal Hazard Adaptation Strategy, Low Carbon Livingstone 2030, and our Biodiversity Strategy. For our capital items under my particular portfolio is investing in water, $5.9 million, investing in wastewater, $7 million, and there is capital investment in waste, which is for the Yeppoon Landfill Resource Recovery Centre to be completed in 2022. So moving forward for Natural Livingstone, this is a win-win situation for our community and all those that are passionate about our environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Friend. I'm assuming no one's speaking against, he says, with a rising inflection in his voice, denoting a question. All right, Councillor Eastwood, do you wish to speak to the report?
I imagine we'll all have a crack at speaking to the budget, Mr Mayor, but I'm very happy to go next. I'm not going to speak much on specifics, just to say that this budget successfully paves the way for the 2021 to 2022 year and beyond. I believe that councillors who have been aided by the professional council officers have, over a number of long and often arduous meetings, come upon a budget that delivers. Being able to provide the best bang for the ratepayer's buck whilst maintaining services is definitely a balancing act, and especially when we've been very conscious and often reminded that we have some of the highest rates in Queensland. In this budget, we've been able to look after our ratepayers with an average of 0.4% or $16.45 rate drop, but also maintain and provide for the future of Livingstone, whether you live in the bush or the beach. I'm enthusiastic about this budget and the future prosperity of our Shire, and I believe that this budget will live up to our community expectations. Livingstone has a relatively small rate space over a large physical area, and as such, it can be a challenge to not only supply community needs and desires such as roads, rubbish, water and sewage, but to add the extras, what one council might call the fluff, to make our community such a special place to call home. I sincerely hope that for the ratepayer and resident, who are ultimately our boss, that the budget that the current councillors have deliberated on for the past 5 months makes living in Livingstone better for you. We have endeavoured to listen to our community and now offer up the 21-22 budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eastwood. I'll just open the floor, councillors, for any final comments from anyone who wishes to make one. Councillor Watson.
I was actually sitting at the table this morning at home thinking, how long have I been a councillor? And it turns out it's been 15 weeks. But I've been very happy to be part of this budget. I believe in needs and wants, and I believe we've covered those in our budget, those ideals. For years, our debt has been increasing rapidly, and at times I thought we were going to be in serious trouble. But this current council has, with the help of the new mayor and councillors, worked hard to reduce our debt level, and that's, I believe, we'll have a future as long as we keep going that way. But there's still a lot that has to be done, and I know the councillors strive to bring both the coastal, the western and the northern people together. We all need to feel loved, and you know, there are times when I know they don't feel that way, and I've just done a trip down to Agnes Water, and I've wondered about how the people at Agnes feel compared to Gladstone, and I've been told by the CEO that they feel very similar to how the northern residents here. I'm happy that we've achieved the 0% increase. As we know, this can't happen every year, but we need to drop it down and to not be the highest in rated of the shires in the state. Over 20 years, I've watched our rates increase greatly, and at times thought, you know, I'm having to climb a mountain here to pay this bill. And our wages haven't increased to go with that, so it's always been hard. But I'm looking forward to next year's budget, and I look forward to working with all of you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Right, anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Bellow?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. When the CFO was presenting her final wrap-up there, I almost felt as if it would be appropriate to maybe have the theme song from Rocky playing Eye of the Tiger. As I think for me that reflects the effort, the challenge, and I say that seriously and as a compliment, but I wouldn't expect you to have to sing it, Anne. But
We'll be pleased if you don't.
yeah, no, I don't mind this. No, but in all seriousness, though, and there's a line from there that it says, rising up to the challenge of our rivals. And there's many things rivaling a council that's coming at it constantly to challenge its sustainability, its ability to deliver the very best for a community. It's not an easy job. And it would have perhaps been easier to just go with a CPI increase. And that's no disrespect to other councils that have done that. But this council, led by the Mayor, were determined to look at every aspect within the budget that we could, that was within our sphere of influence, so that where we could find the savings, where we could grind away at that CPI increase, and we've landed on virtually a 0% rate rise. It's not an easy thing to do. It sounds easy, just do it. But you've got to understand that comes with consequences, because every action has a reaction, and we've got to make sure that our long-term sustainability is strong and solid. And I believe we're able to do that because of the positivity of the growth that's coming around Livingstone and the fact that it's one of the most desirable places to live. And we can therefore provide to our ratepayers, who have been carrying some pretty heavy rates over the last, really since our inception as a new council, 7 years. We're only a fairly young council when you're reminded of that. And the shoulders have been carrying a fairly heavy load in terms of rates. As a result of that, though, we've got a phenomenal place to live. But it's almost like this is a chance to give people a slight break. They can actually catch their breath, and that we understand the impacts of rate rises on every single person out there in our community. That is why we've tried to deliver a 0% rate rise. And I'm very humbled to be a part of that process. So I think I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bello. Would anyone else like to speak to the budget? Councillor Hutton?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. The 21-22 budget papers make promises to our community which we as councillors will need to diligently observe and to live up to over these coming years and budgets. These promises are the undertakings that we've placed upon the organisation on behalf of the community. This budget promises a path forward to provide equality for residential ratepayers, whereby those who make a lifestyle choice to own large res in the future will not be charged a higher differential rate. However, this will only be achieved by us maintaining our promise over a multi-year horizon. This budget promises to continue the budget repair work which began in 2018 with a turbocharged debt reduction program and annual cost minimisation to the community. I commend councillors and officers for their work which has achieved these positive promises for our community. Our community seeks predictability in the rates they pay and desires prudent financial management. This budget will deliver Livingstone's 6th operating surplus in 7 years. With growing surpluses predicted into the future, it's important for us to keep in mind that Livingstone is, for all intensive purposes, a community organisation. And while generating a surplus is a positive financial measure, we should also consider into the future what is a fiscally responsible positive limit to be achieved in any given year. Just as we have tolerances for debt or deficit, so we should limit surpluses, remembering that every dollar drawn from our community unnecessarily is a dollar lost to business growth, a dollar taken from families' discretionary spending, etc., etc. This year's budget has another large capital program which in no small part is funded by the patronage and supported by the federal and state government. This continues our council's past record as an organisation which could generate extraordinary revenue beyond our rate base, which delivers outcomes for our community. Since 2020, this grant base has been gifted largely without competition by the Queensland and Australian governments. They are continuing to intervene in the national market through job creating and job supporting projects which support our Shire. This has allowed our council and our councillors to fulfil many promises. However, we must be on notice that these times will end, and we need to be prepared both for the leaner capital years and for the return of competitive funding rounds into the future. The promises of this budget are positive. However, there continues to be risks which we and our community need to keep in mind. While ever the Australian Government refuses to lodge leases over the land that they've acquired and lease back to land users in the north of our Shire, our community will continue to see an unnecessary financial loss each and every year, which in the past 4 years has equated to more than $1 million in lost rates. Yet the needs of those residents who remain in their same properties are the same as they were prior to their land being purchased by ADF. Furthermore, without clear guidance by the Queensland Government on the waste levy, councils and communities across Queensland will be exposed to great financial risk. Another risk is wage growth within our organisation without the capacity for more FTE to address emerging opportunities or challenges. We must all be wary that while we have a very experienced staff, they also have heavy workloads and very tight operational budgets, which leaves very little room and capacity. However, the greatest risk, the greatest unknown continues to be the boundary review which sits over our heads. Resolution of this is needed to secure our financial future, recognising it has the potential to have wide-ranging impacts on our organisation and our community. Ultimately, as with all budgets, this budget has elements which we individually love or some elements that we may individually dislike. However, it is the result of collaboration, of timeless and multiple debates and decisions that this collective group has had to make over the months of budget meetings starting back in September of last year. I take the opportunity to thank my fellow councillors, the leadership of both the CEO and the CFO for their involvement in this process. May we work diligently together throughout this forthcoming financial year to uphold the promises of the Budget 21-22.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. Would anyone else like to speak before I wrap up? All right, thank you, councillors. Just in closing discussion, councillors, I hark back to my days as an officer of council, and I asked myself, would there have been a situation where in the past I would have recommended a 0% increase to the table? And the answer is no, I would not have. Because generally speaking around the table, there's not an appetite to make some of the hard decisions to facilitate that. In other words, service level review, right across the organisation, cost cutting. So I don't have a problem with that in this particular situation because we've gone through the service level review process. We've fine-tuned the organisation a little bit, and that's the beginning of an ongoing process now that will continue for years to come. And we have to be that diligent. We have to do that exercise in order to remain viable, in order to remain efficient. I understand and agree with Councillor Hutton. We have to be cautious going forward. There are lots of unknowns coming at us, and I just wrote down a few. It aligns with Councillor Hutton's view. I mean, we've got a revaluation coming next year of the Shire. We don't know what impact that's going to have, but I suspect it's going to be an increase in valuations given our real estate market at this point in time. So that's something we're going to have to deal with. We've got the waste levy, as Councillor Hutton pointed out. We've also got challenges in terms of future funding. The bucket is not a bottomless pit, so we may have challenges going forward as the COVID funding starts to dry up, and it will. Boundary review is another one, as Councillor Hutton and Councillor Mather mentioned previously as well. So we have these challenges, councillors. So let's celebrate this budget. But going forward, I think we have some significant challenges to deal with. And I'm sure as a team, we will do that. And let me say, in concluding, I'm very proud of all of you for the work that you've done and the way you've embraced this exercise. And I am also thankful and proud of the staff because they've done an awesome job, as I mentioned earlier. So on that note, councillors, we'll go to the vote on this one. I've got a mover myself, seconder and Councillor Eastwood. All in favour? Those against? Carried 6-1. Thank you. All right, councillors, that concludes our business for today, given it's a special meeting and the budget papers were the only item on the agenda. So I thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your contribution to our Shire, and thank members of the gallery and members of the community viewing in on the live stream. Thank you very much.